Well, hello there. Today we are going to be looking at this. The site is right here, and it's the Fedora Silverblue. And we're not going to look at the site for very long because it is not relevant, or it is, but it's not the point. And I mostly have this here just to show that, hey, this is what we are talking about. So let's close it off. And here you can see my desktop on this operating system. And indeed, we are going to be looking at Fedora Silverblue. We are going to be looking at this distribution and just kind of discussing my first impressions on it, what I have done with my implementation of it so far, and how it has been. And that's about it. But first of all, what is Fedora Silverblue? What even is this? Like, what are we considering here? Now, if you are at all into Linux, which I expect you are if you're watching my channel, you probably do know about Fedora. And in case you don't know about Silverblue, it's an edition of Fedora and it's based on the idea of an immutable root file system. So if you have seen some of my previous content, specifically on NixOS, you might know that I have run an immutable file system inside NixOS before, but this Fedora is a bit different. It uses a bit of a different way to do it. Instead of wiping it every boot necessarily, like NixOS does, where you would store it in temporary file systems in the way I did it, or whatever. That is not what happens here. Instead, this one has like an image. It uses something called rpm-ostree, which is a bit like Git, apparently. But basically, it's an image that's, concrete. It's the same thing every time. And it uses that to boot. And then, like, all the user-editable directories, your home directory and whatnot, those are inside /var. And then that's where you can write things. So it's a bit unique in that sense. It's a bit different from how normal Fedora works. And of course, that means that you're not going to be able to use all the standard ways of doing things in Fedora. Normally, Fedora would use yum or DNF to install applications, for example, but here that is not really the case. So the package management here is quite different. It's definitely more on the unique side, although there is a fairly similar project from OpenSUSE called NixOS, which also has a somewhat similar system, but this one in particular does a thing where it uses mostly Flatpaks for your desktop applications, so you're going to be using Flatpaks for it. Those are going to be included, or the Fedora's own Flatpak repositories. It is quite small though, and you probably want to add a FlatHub into it, so just be aware of that. And once you do, you'll be able to use Flatpaks. But of course, not everything is in Flatpaks, so in those cases, there's something called toolbox. So if I just launch my terminal, I can actually go into this thing called toolbox. So I can type toolbox enter, and this will put me to a container which contains basically a normal Fedora installation. And we can actually use human DNF here, and then that software will run inside that container, inside my user editable directories. So that way we can still run normal apps without using the root file system. And to do this, we can, for example, say yum install something and it will install it. But in my case, I've already installed something. So we could, for example, run GNOME tweaks, which is not available inside Flatpak or the stock. It is just available on the Flatpak repositories that we have. So I have installed it using Toolbox. And we can see we can run GUI apps and everything just fine. And of course, having to manually enter toolbox enter every time would be annoying. So what we can actually do here is we can do toolbox run. And then we can run, for example, GNOME tweaks. So this is a convenient way of quickly launching these apps if we want to do so. And that saves some trouble. And of course, that's not absolutely everything. We also have some things like drivers, for example. Having these as a container isn't going to help us. Also, having these from Flatpak won't help us. So what is being done with drivers and other packages that need direct root access is there something called rpm-ostree. Once again, I mentioned this before, and that's what actually used for the image. But you can also use rpm-ostree to install packages. Now, this is not recommended for like normal desktop applications because it can cause instability, it can cause issues, and it sort of defeats the purpose of using an immutable root file system. But if you, for example, want to run virtualization, or you want to install like a graphics driver that you don't have, for example, NVIDIA, or something else, then you of course can't do that in any other way. So there is the option of using that. And what that will do is it will rebuild the image and then implement whatever you install within the new image. And then you can access it by rebooting your computer. And yes, you need to reboot for that because of the image system. So that's one thing, but since you're going to be mostly installing through Flatpak or toolboxes, you should be okay without rebooting too often. But just something to keep in mind, it is a thing. And beyond needing to reboot and use to install applications, you can also use it to do other things. So for example, the Firefox version that came with this operating system is it's in the base image. It's sort of stuck in there, and it's not really complete. It doesn't have all the codecs you need for videos, for example. So that's not good. That's not what I would want. I need the codecs because I want to watch videos on my browser, and that's not going to work. So of course, in the image, you can't, for example, delete it in Software Center. So you need to use rpm-ostree. And you can do that with a command. So once again, if we run this, we can see rpm-ostree. We can actually run something called rpm-ostree override, and then we can do, for example, remove, and then we can remove a package from the image. And the same way you also have to reboot here. But that way you can remove the stock applications as well. It's a bit more of a chore because of the immutable root file system and how to just implement it. The image system means you have to reboot after deleting things from it, and it means you have to go through trouble of overriding it and removing it, which means you do need to use command line, unfortunately, which sucks because this distribution is meant to be used by people who might not even know command line as well. It's meant to be just like Fedora, but on with the immutable file system. But the fact you can't like get a web browser with proper codecs as your only browser without going to command line is a bit, it's not optimal at all. And that's just something that I feel like is a pity. They should be including Flatpak instead of that for the browser or whatever, or they should provide some GUI way of doing it in the Software Center or elsewhere, because this is really not that intuitive. I had to go search the internet for it, and that's really not a good start for that. But it's fine. It didn't take much effort from me, but just putting it out there, that's something you will have to do if you want to have a proper browser with codec support. And I have also used it to install like virtualization software because those are not really functional through Flatpak and other things if you want GPU press through, for example. And that's just something worth noting, something that's good to know and think about. But anyway, that covers the main software installation methods. Not too problematic, not too complex, but it is a bit different. It does require using these tools in suitable fashion. And oh yeah, the toolbox also needs command line, so that's a bit, once again, unintuitive for somebody who doesn't know the command line, but just maybe this stuff will get developed more at some point. And now we'll move on. Let's talk about desktop a bit. So it comes with GNOME. There is the Kinoite version, which I tried and had a horrible experience with. The Wayland didn't work at all, and it just sort of gave me issues. Like the first thing I got when I booted into it was an error, which is, I mean, it seemed to work, but it gave an error, which is not good. And overall, KDE is a very good experience for me. And it seems like my graphics card change hasn't changed that. It still feels slow, it still feels choppy. And that's just not my cup of tea. So I went to the GNOME version, which is the standard Silverblue instead. And that's what we are at now. And the GNOME itself, now it's not like this. This is one I have customized extensions and my other means. But the stock version is a fairly vanilla GNOME. There is like a icon overlay over the wallpaper as an extension, but that's about it. It's a very standard GNOME, and yeah, not much to add. It works, you can get extensions. There's this thing called Extension Manager that you can get through Fedora. I might talk about that separately as well. But or you get it through Flatpak. My brain is a mess. But anyway, you can get that through Flatpak and you can use that, and that's about it regarding that matter. And yeah, really not much more to add. It's a distribution. Now, there are some things that happen, like let's say that we launch software and we want to run an update. You can see this is just a temporary thing. But if you want to run this update for this Fedora platform, we can try to run it. It will start installing it. And we'll find out that after a little bit, it will error out. Because the package has a hash issue of some kind. The hash on the package is not the same as the actual system, or like what it expects. So it fails, and that happens through command line as well. So this is not like a GUI thing, and it is also not specific to me, I think, because it seems somebody else online has had the same issue. And I do believe this is a very temporary matter. There's, as you can see here, we get an error. But it is most likely just a bad package, and it will probably get fixed soon. I made a bug report on it already, so, it should be fine. But just worth noting, there are imperfections on occasions. The immutability could cause problems. This might have to do with it, or it might not. I don't know. But it happens, and that's that. And yeah, we have a package that's problematic, but that's an individual case. And I will make an update on longer term impressions down the line, so I'll go through how that goes then. But for now, today, it's not working, and that individual package update. But that's okay, the update came today as well, so there's plenty of time. I'm in no rush to update it, so I'm ready to wait until it is fixed. But just worth noting. And it is Fedora 36, if that's of interest, just complete random, but yeah, that's the case. And the GNOME version is 32.3 right now, so it's fairly new GNOME, works fairly well, not much to add there. Now, the next thing I want to mention is the installation. It's odd that it's the last thing I do, but this is what I'm going to mention. So the installation is very simple. If you've ever installed, for example, Red Hat, it's similar but with less options. It has a few different options, and for like very few, it's like I think 3 or 4 or something, like, or 5, I don't know. It's very few options. You can set your key map, your language, your drive setup, your user, your root user, stuff like that. Very simple, not much to add there. But it is worth noting some things regarding that. For one thing, it does not check for the partition correctness. So if you used automated partitioning like I did this time, you're totally okay. You don't have to worry about it. That's correct, that works. But if you do a manual partitioning, you have to be careful and you have to know what you're doing and make it correct. What should be easy enough, but you need to make sure it actually is a functional one given the system. It might be a good idea to install this with the automatic one, then look through those partitions, and then do it manually if that's what you want to do. And just because it does not warn you, so if you do an incorrect one, it will still like allow you to work, and then the system will not work because the partitions don't work for it. And that's just something to note, and it's just a good thing to know about. Now, another thing is that there's encryption, which you can enable. I enabled encryption for my disk. But there's a really annoying thing related to that in the actual installation process. So, when you install, you get a choice of key maps. I use the Finnish one because that's what my key map has and my keyboard has. And, I type in a password for the encryption. With that key map, the installer also said my key map for the encryption was in Finnish, so it was the Finnish key map. I install that, and then I do the installation, fine, it's all in Finnish during that. Then I try to boot afterward, and oh, the password doesn't work. Yeah, if I was a new user, if I wasn't very familiar, and if I hadn't come across this issue before, I would have quit right there. But I have. The issue is that for some reason they don't use the key map in the that you set in the installer when you're actually booting the thing and decrypting it. So what we end up in is the Finnish key map when typing the password originally, but the US key map when booting the system, which is really stupid. If you're if you're going to have it be in the US when booting, you should you should actually have it in the US when typing the password. It's really not complicated. And it's not hard to change either. It's one kernel parameter. I have changed it and it works. It's one kernel parameter and that's just one thing. And yeah, it's not a big deal for me, but it's definitely a turn off for somebody trying to, as a new user, do this, and it's not a good thing. But it's a minor deal. It's just whatever. I dealt with it and it's fine now. And yeah, just mentioning once again that is an annoying thing about the installation and the initial booting. And speaking of that, when I actually went to my kernel parameters to add in the one that changed my key map, what we actually ended up with there was a bit of a different process because you can't edit your usual configuration files for the stuff because immutable root file system. But rpm-ostree actually provides you with options for doing it. It provides you some commands, so you can do, for example, rpm-ostree, and then you can do kver, and then you can do editor. Oh, krx, sorry, and then you can do editor. And this will allow you to modify your kernel arguments in nano like this. Pretty simple. And that's how I added the key up in there. And then it will automatically build the redo all the stuff to include those arguments, so you don't have to worry about that either. There's also rpm-ostree initramfs, so you can do, and then you can add various options to add arguments to it or whatever you want to do. And use tracket, by the way. So it's just something that's also worth noting. It has tools for doing these things, which is great. It's nice to see those because I would be stuck if it didn't. And I'm very glad that those exist, and that's just a good thing. And the overall experience has been very stable. The settings app does crash in the key binding menu sometimes, but that just seems to be a GNOME thing. I can't really blame that. Also, GNOME software has some minor issues, not that big. If you want to read more about this, I have written a Medium blog on this, so I'll link that down below. You can go read that. But it's not perfect, but overall the experience has been pretty good. It's very solid, it works as expected, and it's the features of being able to go back to exact same builds from before, that, before update or whatever. The fact that I can update my apps with, and still go back to an old version of the actual OS with my new apps and everything else that comes with this, it's really nice so far. And it's just, it's a great piece of software. It does what it does very well. It has been in development for quite a while, and that has clearly paid off. I am interested in trying the microOS from OpenSUSE as well, so I will be trying that someday. Although just not in. Oh, that is still in earlier development for desktop, so it's all in GNOME is in beta on that one, and KDE is on alpha on that one, so it's probably not going to be as polished, but I'll see it as I get to it. And I think I'll pretty much end this here. So what can I say about this is that it's a great experience so far, and I'm going to keep updating you. So I'm going to make probably more content regarding this operating system, like maybe in a week, how it has been to use, if I have come across any more issues, if the package thing has been fixed, stuff like that. And well, we'll continue with this topic then. But until then, uh, I hope you enjoyed this content, and I hope it's helpful in outlining my own thoughts, my own impressions. Really, it's more of just a blog type thing, or a vlog, I guess. Me discussing this, what I think of it, how it has been so far, and my future plans. I'm going to keep using it. I'm going to test it. I'm also going to compare it to macOS. I have mentioned all of these things, but yeah. I hope you have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next video.